Ladies and gentlemen, on today's episode, we dive into 5 tips for creek wading in the summertime. We discuss how many combos you, the listeners, and I actually own, and the results might surprise you. And we answer your questions about pond lure choice, switching out your trebles on your hard baits for single hooks, and more on today's episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast, brought to you by The Rod Locker. Premium gear and expert advice from a staff you can trust. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Tackle Talk Podcast. I appreciate you all tuning in today. Before we get into the episode, we do have to give a big thank you to the folks that make Tackle Talk possible each and every week. The amazing folks over at The Rod Locker. They're an awesome family-owned tackle shop in southern Indiana that ships nationwide and has taken care of so many of you Tackle Talk listeners over the years. Brian, Chad, the whole crew over at The Rod Locker are second to none in terms of the selection they have of both new and lightly used fishing gear. They have the most incredible selection of lightly used fishing gear on the internet. I will stack that up against anybody else you can find. They have awesome deals on great name brand rods and reels that honestly you can't even tell were used when you get them half the time. I've been blown away by the condition of some of the used gear that I've bought through The Rod Locker. But also, they have an incredible selection of baits, line, accessories, apparel, anything that you can need for your fishing adventures. I would highly recommend you check The Rod Locker first. They have incredible prices. They have sales that you won't find anywhere else. They have an amazing loyalty program. They have fast shipping and the best customer service that you're going to find of any tackle shop in the country. There's a reason that I buy my fishing gear through The Rod Locker. I have bought my fishing gear from Brian and Chad way before this show ever even existed. I would run through a brick wall for those guys because I know how they treat their customers and they run their business right. I feel good buying my gear through The Rod Locker, and I know so many of you listening to Tackle Talk have switched to them as well. And as always, just for listening to Tackle Talk, you get an extra discount over at The Rod Locker. You can use code TACKLETALKJULY, or depending on when you're listening to this, if we are now past August 1st, you're going to want to use code TACKLETALKAugust. So we're at that time where that code's about to switch. Tackle Talk July or Tackle Talk August, depending on when you make your purchase, is going to save you an extra 5% off your order. It's sales stackable. It's a great code to enter every single time. It lets The Rod Locker know that we sent you, but it also saves you money on the back end. It's a win-win for everybody. So go check them out over at www.rodlocker.com and be sure to use code TACKLETALKJULY or Tackle Talk August. All right, everybody. First up on the show today, we have some sad news. We have some very serious news that nobody wanted to hear this week. A brave young man that a lot of us have been following over the past probably 6 months or so when I was made aware of his situation. Will Roberts, a 15-year-old from Alabama that many of us found through the internet, a kid and a young man that had a huge passion for the outdoors, but was fighting stage 4 osteosarcoma, which is a deadly form of bone cancer, unfortunately passed away on July 23rd in San Diego at Rady's Children's Hospital. And I didn't know Will personally, but he touched the lives of so many people in the hunting and fishing world after he took to social media earlier this year, kind of asking and pleading for prayers and support as he was fighting a very brave uphill battle against an aggressive form of bone cancer. And I know many of the fishing community had connected with Will. He'd been out fishing with multiple pros amid his sickness and his journey, and just his faith, I think, and his bravery touched a lot of people. So I'll leave it there. I know that Will was a very special kid to a lot of people in the fishing world, and a lot of people in our kind of circle felt a connection to him, and we're praying very, very hard for him. And we will continue to pray for Will and for his family and for everybody that knew him. But Will Roberts passed away this past week at the age of 15. Okay, let's pivot here. Let's move to something a little bit more upbeat. I just wanted to thank everybody for your feedback and messages from last week's iCast episode. it always brings me so much joy that all of you find so much joy in that episode because it's such a beast to put together. Like flying back on Friday, having to work my regular job Saturday and Sunday, and finding the time in between that work, usually very, very, very late at night, to try and record, edit, and finish a 3+ hour episode that probably has 15 to 20 hours into it by the time you factor in pre-production, writing the outline and notes, recording, post-edit. It's a miracle that that show gets out on Tuesday every year after iCast, but somehow it does. And then tack on the fact that I appreciate you guys bearing with me and my voice and probably how I sounded during that episode because I was battling a 103.5 degree fever the entire time. And I think that might have been like the fishing podcast equivalent of the Michael Jordan flu game. Like people are saying that might go down as one of the grittiest, toughest performances in bass fishing podcast history. I mean, we're talking a true where were you moment, the 2026 iCast episode. But all jokes aside, again, thank you guys. Every message, every DM, every email, I appreciate it all a ton. And I hope you guys enjoyed that kind of long, but also very in-depth look at the gear that we were able to see at iCast this year. Okay, let's keep it rocking and rolling here. Next up, we don't really have a whole lot of pro news. MLF and the Elites are both still on their kind of like summer hiatus. We did have the NPFL at the St. Lawrence River, and your winner over there was Zach Burge, who has been on one heck of a tear as of late. So congrats to Zach Burge. But I believe MLF returns not this week, but next week, like August 6th. And then the Elite Series is the week after that. So we are almost back, folks. We are so close. We're talking Angler of the Year races, automatic classic berths, the chopping block for next year's tours, who are the new faces that are going to qualify for next year's tours. There is so much that is on the line in these last few weeks, and I'm very excited to watch it go down. We will have your results when all of those do happen. Okay, let's jump into the main segment of today's episode, and I picked this topic because it's late July, water is low, it's hot, and in my opinion, it is the perfect time of year to get in the dang water and wet wade. Like, that's what summer is built for. Putting on your crummy shoes, your old pair of shorts, grabbing one rod, a little bag of baits, and getting into nature's swimming pool, the creek. So I've said it a ton over the years, but it's one of my absolute favorite ways to fish because in the summertime, when it's so hot outside, it feels so good to get into the water. It's like combining the things that are the best to do in the summer, like be in a pool or be at the beach. So you're in the water. You're not really feeling the effects of that hot midday sun as much because it feels great that you're walking around in cool water. But then you get to pair that with the activity that we all love so much, which is fishing. And because the water is relatively low this time of year, you can wade so many more places than you can almost any other times of year because there's less dangerous current or flow. There's less tricky deep spots that you can't see because everything is so clear right now that even your deep spots you can see and spot right away. You also have the fact that fish are eating topwater almost all day long. It's just the best time of year to get out there and explore your local creeks. So today I have put together 5 tips for creek wading, and these tips are, I think, going to be general enough and broad enough that they'll apply to almost everybody listening. So no matter where you're listening in the United States, I think that these will be beneficial to you. And if we jump right in, the first tip I'm going to give you guys in this episode is when creek wading, and this is going to actually be a little ironic, but in terms of putting yourself in a position to catch the most fish, my tip is actually to get out of the creek and out of the water whenever that opportunity presents itself. So if you see a nice little bank up ahead that you can get to, and then the other part of that is that you can cast from without getting hung up and you have enough room to cast, get out and do it. Because anytime that you can get out of the water, it just takes one of those potential issues out of play, which is your disturbing of the water while you're in it. You're making noise, you're kicking up silt, all of those things that let fish know that something is going on. You are way stealthier out of the water than you are in the water. So if you're in the water, there's a good chance that those fish know that you're there well before you get close to them. So when you get out of the water and you start casting from the bank, now you're letting everything calm down, you're causing less disturbance, and you just have a better chance of casting to those fish and picking them off while their guard is a little bit more down. Less disturbance, being further away or further removed from the fish in a creek wading situation is usually a good thing. A creek is such a small ecosystem that the fish in that ecosystem can keep tabs on everything so much easier, and they know right away when something is off because it's such a small playing field. Now, I also know that getting out of the creek does pose a whole list of new potential problems, which is why I'm bad about this. And I often just opt to stay in the water. So I need to take my own advice here because getting out of the creek and onto the bank now means dealing with steep banks, falling, ticks, poison ivy, tree branches in your way of casting, all of the things that come with getting back on the bank. But the trade-off is that you're not disturbing the water anymore and you're not alerting those fish that you're there as much. So that's my tip number one. Don't be afraid to get out of the water and try to remove yourself from the creek whenever possible, just to be a little bit more stealthy. Now, tip number two here for creek wading in the summertime is kind of on the other end of tip number one. And this tip is that casting distance is the most important part of your creek setup. It's not sensitivity, it's not power, it's not the weight of your setup, it's how far can you cast. Because again, you're going to catch so many more fish if the fish don't know that you're there yet. And one way you can do that is what we just talked about, getting out of the water and stop disturbing it and making noise and moving the water as you walk. Stop doing that. Yes, you'll have a little bit more stealth on your side. The other way is just to cast so far that your bait is landing in an area where the fish are so far away that they're still undisturbed, even if you are in the water. Like when I'm creek fishing, I bet 75% or more of the fish that I do catch come within the first 5 to 8 turns of my reel handle. They're far away. Like they are in the location where I can cast the furthest. That's where I'm getting hit because those fish are so much more undisturbed when I can bomb cast that far away. So at the end of the day, the name of the game when making a cast when you're creek wading is how can I reach the spot I want to without being close enough to negatively impact that spot at the same time. And that's why casting distance is the most important characteristic of your setup. And sometimes that means adjusting your setup accordingly. So for me, that means a spinning combo, like a medium or a medium light, 7 foot or longer, so I can really fling those baits, and light braid. Like 10 pound is the heaviest I will go. Sometimes I'll even go down to 8. And that's the setup that really lets me cast as far as possible with those kind of small to mid-sized creek baits. So that's tip number 2. Again, casting distance is the most important part of your creek combo. Okay, tip number 3 here for creek wading today is going to be to pay attention to the forage. And you've all heard this before, like in different situations. You know, everybody's heard match the hatch. That's a great general rule because, again, if you're trying to get living things to eat something, making the thing you're trying to get them to eat look like something that they would eat is a good thing. Duh, that's a given. But in a creek situation, it's even more vital because of the simple fact that in a small creek, which is a small ecosystem, those bass have less diversity of forage because they're confined to such a small area. Like this isn't a giant lake where that same fish can eat gizzard shad, threadfin shad, bluegill, green sunfish, perch, alewife, herring, mullet. Like this is a creek. This is a situation where they have very limited options to eat. So maybe in your particular creek, there are like craws and creek jubs, and that's about it. Maybe it's like more green sunfish and bugs are the 2 main forage sources that they're eating. You just have a smaller forage pool, like a smaller area. And I mean, shoot, a lot of these creek bass live in the same little hole for like their whole life. So they're seeing the same types of forage every day with no real diversity. Like they're staring at the same 15 crawfish over and over again. They're staring at the same 20 to 30 minnows in that tiny little minnow ball. They're so familiar with their surroundings, way more so than like a lake fish that has so many more possibilities that they could see at any time. So pay attention to your forage. Flip some rocks, find some craws. What color are your craws? How big are they? Pay attention to what you find in fish's mouths when you do catch them. Look at the bank for dead forage. Like what's on the bank? Do you see dead craws? Do you see dead bait fish? If you're seeing a lot of, 2.5 inch craws and 2-inch darters around and that's it, then I probably wouldn't go around throwing a giant 4 or 5 inch paddle tail swim bait in that creek or like a giant 120 size plopper. be smart. That forage matching, even if it's just the general size, is so important to these confined fish that you're fishing for in a creek. Okay, tip number 4 here for creek fishing today is going to be don't pre-qualify water. And I think this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're trying to find fishing spots in general, but it definitely comes into play when you're looking at creek spots because a lot of people will pull up to a spot, they take one look at it and they say, nope, that's too shallow, and they leave. Or they pull up and they look at it and they say, nope, there's definitely no fish in there, and they leave. That is a recipe for being a very bad creek angler because a good creek angler will tell you, you would be very, very surprised what sits in these crazy shallow, featureless, unimpressive stretches of small water. And the problem is that we look at the water and we say, yeah, if I was a bass, I wouldn't be in there. But the problem is you're not a bass. And also bass don't just pick up and move. They don't have, the ability to decide where they live. Where they're born is where they're born and they make the best of it. And it's also mind-blowing to watch and see that like the smallest little feature in a tiny creek can hold bass. Like we're talking the smallest little root coming off of a tree on the bank that's like 3 inches in diameter and sticking down in the water. There could be a bass behind that root. Like there could be a cinder block in the water in the middle of the creek and there's probably bass on it. I've said this before, I think, on the show, but growing up creek fishing, Jeff and I used to fish a place that had a microwave and a toilet that someone had dumped off of this little farm bridge in a creek. And we caught so many fish off of that toilet and off of that microwave. And the water in that spot was shallow enough that the toilet and the microwave both stuck out of the water. And we've caught 4 and 5 pound bass in that creek, no joke. So if it's deep enough, I would say to cover your ankles, there's probably portions of that creek that hold really, really decent fish. You just have to get in and walk and explore. So all of those guys and girls that are driving by the creeks and going, that's too shallow, that's too small, there's no fish in there, let them think that because they're pre-qualifying that water. And as a good angler, you shouldn't do that. The only way that you can confidently say that water is dead or it's not worth fishing is to put the time in and fish it extensively and explore every nook and cranny of that creek. And I guarantee you there are people listening to this right now that are driving in their car that are going right over little bridges and roads all day long that look like nothing more than a little drainage ditch or something, but they have decent fish in them, but they've never even thought to get out and try and fish it. Do it. Try it. You would be so surprised. One of my favorite creeks in Dayton is a creek that no one fishes because everybody thinks that it's too small. And it's their loss because I've caught plenty of great fish out of this tiny little creek that, like I said, most of which is like ankle deep. So that's tip number 4 here. Do not pre-qualify water when you're looking for spots to fish in creeks. And then tip number 5 here today, our final tip is going to be that when you do find water that has fish in it in a super shallow creek, depth is king. And I don't mean that the creek has to be a certain depth to hold fish. I mean, if there are fish in that creek at all, the next thing you should look for is depth changes because depth holds fish. But the problem here is that depth is relative. If the creek is 2 inches deep as you're walking around and then you stumble on a spot that is 12 inches deep, that's a spot you should pay attention to. But then on like a bigger scale, if you're fishing a creek that is a foot deep in most places and you come around a corner and there's a tiny little hole that's 2.5 feet deep, fish that hole hard. Relatively deep spots become home base for those bass. Like it doesn't mean that they're there all the time because they will move around and they'll hunt and they'll explore, but they will relate to that deeper spot because as water levels fluctuate, that's always going to be a spot that they can sit and stay in. And yes, like in a creek situation, cover is important, shade is important, current is important, but depth is the one thing that holds fish all year long in a creek. And I've heard people before refer to deep holes in creeks as like luxury real estate. And it always makes me laugh because it is true. Like deeper holes offer security. They offer a stable location from like flooding or droughts. They hold more food. The water temp is going to be more stable. It's not to say that they can't live somewhere else, but given the choice, that deeper hole is the most desirable real estate in the whole creek. So I'm always looking up ahead for dark spots that could signal depth changes as I'm waiting. And then I'm casting to those dark spots or those depth change spots early and often. Oftentimes, that's where I find my biggest fish by far is the farthest away I can be to cast to that deeper water that I can see like up on the horizon. And you can look for cover, you can look for trees, you can look for rocks, all of that. But in my opinion, depth is king. And not traditional depth, relative depth to where you're fishing. Depth could be 4 inches, depth could be 4 feet, depth could be 12 feet. It all depends on the specific creek that you're fishing. So if I had to sum up a combination of all 5 of our tips for creek wading today, I guess it would be how effectively can you target the relative depth changes that you see at a far enough distance to minimize the disturbance you're causing while in that creek. That, in one sentence, is how you find fishing success wet wading a small creek. And right now is the perfect time to do just that. July and August are the best times of year to get in and wet wade. It feels great. The water is low enough that it's actually pushing those fish to those obvious depth changes. You can throw a little popper all day long because they're going to eat topwater 24 hours a day right now. The water is low enough that it's the most navigable the creek is ever going to be. So this is my plea to you guys. Get out, enjoy this time of year for what it is. A great time to get in the water and wet wade. And I hope you guys take advantage of it. It's one of my favorite ways to fish. All right, everybody, let's get to this week's fishing poll here in just a second. But first, before we do, the Tackle Talk podcast and the fishing poll are brought to you in part by Humminbird. And as of the past year or so, Humminbird has unveiled the most impressive line of graphs and fish finders that we've seen in a long time with their popular new Explore series. And the Humminbird Explore fish finders deliver industry-leading sonar and mapping in a simple, intuitive interface, giving anglers top-tier performance without sacrificing ease of use. Those Explore units just offer such an intuitive interface on the water that it makes it the easiest way for you to see clearer, you can fish smarter, you can feel more confident with the water that you're actually fishing. And every Explore unit comes preloaded with thousands of industry-leading Lake Master and Coastmaster maps included. So that's not even something you have to buy after the fact like you used to. It already comes on those units. And Explore's best-in-class clarity give you an incredible look underwater because it just has that bright, easy-to-read screen that performs in all conditions. So whether you go with a 9-inch, a 10-inch, or a 12-inch, you can't go wrong with an Explore. For more information or to grab your own Explore graph, you can head over to www.humminbird.com/explore. And that's spelled XPLORE. Again, that's www.humminbird.com/explore to see for yourself why there is so much more to explore with Humminbird. The Tackle Talk podcast is also brought to you in part by Minn Kota. And today, for you boat folks out there, let's talk for a second about the incredible Minn Kota Ultrex. The Minn Kota Ultrex is built to provide unmatched control of your boat with effortless steering from an ultra-responsive foot control and the ability to lock down that spot when you need it most. Because at the tap of a button, you now seamlessly turn any spot into a rock-solid stronghold with that spot lock technology, the industry's gold standard in GPS anchoring. So to see for yourself why Ultrex is trusted by pros and weekend warriors alike due to its rugged durability and reliability at any level of competitive fishing, you can head over to www.minnkotamotors.com/Ultrex. Again, that's www.minnkotamotors.com/Ultrex to see for yourself why Ultrex is built to fish.
This is the Tackle Talk podcast fishing poll. Brought to you by Humminbird. Explore more at humminbird.com.
All right, everybody. Next up on the show here today, we have the fishing pole. And after spending like 3 or 4 days in Orlando, surrounded by a billion rods and reels, and just having so many specialized models and tapers and swim bait rods and BFS rods and minnow shaking rods, so many rods that aren't big multi-purpose, multi-use rods, as I come back to reality with all the rest of us regular Joe anglers, I'm curious, how many combos do you actually own? That's my question for today here in the fishing pole. Quite simply, go to your garage, go to your boat, go to wherever you keep your combos and do a quick count. How many combos do you as an angler actually own? Because I think my answer would probably surprise some people. I have owned, with a D at the end, a ton of combos over the years. Like, I'm going to guess I've owned well over 100 different individual combos, but I'm a guy that likes to try rods and reels, use them, decide if I like them or not, and then sell them to fund my next purchase. Like, I'm kind of the opposite of a hoarder. I actually like getting rid of rods and reels to make room for new ones. I don't want to keep them all. I can't use them all. That seems like a silly thing to do to me. I actually like parting ways with rods and reels that I felt like I've put my time in with to now go and try new things. Like, that's just my attitude of, if I bought it, I used it, I had experience with it, now it's time for it to move on and time for something different. Except my like core 5 or 6 combos that I have in my garage. Those are my staples. That's like my core arsenal. And those stay with me for years and years and years. And my goal whenever I buy a new combo is always, can this new combo supplant one of my core setups? Like, will I like it so much that it can knock one of those off the podium and out of my rotation? That's the lens that I look at new rods and new reels through a lot of times. I have a handful of rods that I love and I use like 75% of the time. And then I have some new ones that I have bought to play with and experiment with and see if I like enough to work them into my core lineup. And I would bet that the number that I own total, including those that I have new and I'm just kind of playing with, would surprise some of you. Because for a guy that has and runs a fishing show and talks about gear a lot, I actually don't own as many combos as you probably think I would at a given time. So I went out and counted every single combo that I have right now in my possession, and I own 12 currently. 7 core setups is what I would probably call those, and then 5 that are relatively new builds that I'm trying out or playing with currently. And a lot of those 5 rods and reels that are like my new ones that I'm playing with are actually very inexpensive budget setups that I'm trying out because I love testing out new budget gear, rods especially, but reels too. I just always like the folks that have these kind of like $150 and under rods and reels to play with, especially because that's like the number one question we get asked is about budget gear. So I'm always playing with new budget gear. And one of these days, I guess I'll probably do a full like updated rod and reel walkthrough of what I own, but we don't have time for that today. Today, I'm asking you specifically, how many combos do you own in the fishing pole? And for me, my answer is a clean dozen. I own 12 that are in my garage right now, and that is it. So now here's the fun part. That is my answer. I'm going to open up our results here, and I'm going to let you know where you guys landed. And these are now breaking up. The way I set this up is to break it up with anybody that answered with 10 or less. And then there's going to be a category of 10 to 20 combos. And then there's a category of 20 or more. And it looks like the results here from you all are pretty much what I thought we would see. And truthfully, what I kind of hoped we would see out of this poll, because it is an honest, good spread here. It looks like we've got 47.9% of you, so almost half of you, responded that you own 10 or less combos. And then from there, 31.3% of you said that you own 10 to 20 combos. And then 20.8% of you said that you own 20 or more combos. So again, that's a very good spread. There's not really a runaway by any means. And if you actually take these results and you rephrase it and you say, do you own more or less than 10 combos? It's basically split 50-50. You're going to go like 48% own less than 10 combos and 52%, give or take, own more than 10 combos. So I love that. Because what's really interesting is that that is a sample size of people who pretty religiously listen to an in-depth fishing podcast. Like, you're not casuals, you're people who love bass fishing and are so invested in bass fishing that you spend your free time listening to my dumb butt talk about fishing for like an hour a week. And even that audience is about half and half in terms of, do you own less than 10 combos or more than 10 combos? And what that tells me is that a lot of you are doing what I do, and you're building efficient combos. You're building versatile lineups of your rods and reels. Now, the next question would probably be, why are you doing that? And I think that's an interesting question to explore, because there's probably a few reasons that you would own less than 10 combos. One could be, you're like me and you're a cheapskate. I guess we can maybe put that a little bit more politely. Maybe you're frugal, right? That is me to the bone. I hate spending money unnecessarily. So yeah, it could just be a budget thing. I'm also assuming a lot of our audience that listens to the show kayak fishes because I do it and I talk about it a lot. So I think naturally we probably have a healthy number of kayak anglers that listen to this. And by necessity, you have to have a smaller rod or reel arsenal if you're a kayak guy or gal. You can't take 30 combos with you on the kayak like you can on a boat. So I think out of necessity, I think kayak anglers build a little bit more efficient setups. Or it could just be that some of you are younger, or you're just starting out, or you're earlier in your fishing journey than some other folks, and you don't have that much gear yet. You have not accumulated more than 10 combos yet. Or it could just be that you've seen the light and you've realized that you don't need a dedicated setup for every slightly different bait. Like you don't need a setup for 110 jerk baits and then a different setup for 110 junior jerk baits. You don't need a setup for weightless wacky rigs and then a totally different setup for slightly weighted wacky rigs. You don't need 800 different setups, regardless of what the fishing industry tells you you need. So regardless of why, almost half of you own 10 or less combos. And I think that says a lot. I think it says that even hardcore anglers are streamlining their setups nowadays. Whether it's out of convenience, out of cost, out of available space, there are a ton of different reasons, but regardless, you're doing it. Which is why I also think our episode from like 6 years ago about the only 5 rods that you need to go bass fishing still holds up today, and it's still one of our most popular episodes ever. But I think if I was a rod company, I would actually be advertising almost the exact opposite of how some of these companies do today. Like I would be trying to create these very cool special action rods that can do a lot of things really well. Like I wouldn't market a rod as a deep crank rod. I would try and make a rod that can not only deep crank, but also handles open water chatterbaits and spinnerbaits really well, and handles mag drafts really well. Something like that, like a jumbo moving bait rod or something. And then you could have like a light moving bait rod that handles square bills, shallow divers, ploppers, jerk baits, and poppers really well, or something like that. I would be trying to create these rods that blur the lines. And if you have to put all of the baits on a Venn diagram and list the best characteristics of like a square bill rod, a shallow diver rod, a plopper, jerk bait, popper rod, where do all of those overlap? And then create that rod. Like it's not perfect for one thing, but it's very, very good at 6 things. Like a rod that I always come back to and I talk about a lot because it fits this description pretty well is like the Dobyns 736 CB glass rod, because that is what I call a unicorn rod, where it can do a lot of things really well. It can medium crank, it can do chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, glide baits, harnessed swim baits. That rod is really cool because it just has this moderate action that's still heavy enough and it has enough backbone to, again, blur that line really well. So those are the rods that I think a lot of us would be interested in if the rod companies would head that direction. And then there's still a good number of you that have 10 plus combos. And then 1 in 5 of you said that you have 20 plus combos. And that's the mark of a serious angler too. I mean, I have 12, so I'm technically in the camp of, 10 to 20 combos. But also in reality, I really only use about 6 or 7 of them religiously. So just some interesting data there. I'm impressed on how many of the listeners of a very no-nonsense fishing show have 10 or less total rod and reel combos. And I think it says a lot. And I think if I was a rod or reel company, I would be paying attention to that type of data. So thank you for participating in this week's fishing poll. I did get my act together, and by now, when you're listening to this, the next fishing poll for next week's episode is already up on the website, and you can go vote on that right now. All right, and finally here, we're going to get to the mailbag here in just a second. But first, before we do, the Tackle Talk podcast and the mailbag are powered by Amped Outdoors. And listen, I spent 3 days looking at basically all of the fishing gear in the entire industry under one roof at ICAST, and there were a fair share of battery companies there, none of which I would rather have in my boat or in my kayak than my Amped Outdoors batteries. Seeing all of the competition up close just gives you a renewed respect and appreciation for what Amped Outdoors does. They're quite literally the best of all worlds. The people, the product, the price are all unmatched. They're a family-owned company out of Hudson, Wisconsin, with an amazing down-to-earth staff at the helm there and leadership team, and they're not one of these giant conglomerates that I saw this past week that feel like they have more levels to their corporate structure than a game of Mario. And then they have an incredible product because their batteries themselves are light, they're waterproof. Everything over 50 amp hour comes standard with Bluetooth connectivity through their free app for easy monitoring, heated charging, just everything that you need in a rock solid battery with an amazing 10-year warranty on every battery that you purchase. Oh yeah, and they're also a fraction of the cost of the batteries that I used to use. The quality you get with Amped and the price that they're able to give it to you at is pretty incredible. So that's why I and so many other anglers are turning to Amped Outdoors for all of our lithium batteries. 12 volt, 24 volt, 36 volt, accessories, chargers, they've got it all. So go check out their full line of lithium batteries and accessories today by heading over to www.ampedoutdoors.com. Again, that's www.ampedoutdoors.com. Power your passion with Amped.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast Mailbag, powered by Amped Outdoors, your source for premium, affordable lithium batteries.
All right, our first question here is from Jace, who says, "Hi, Andrew. I'm 15 years old, and I used to be a kid who occasionally fished and never caught anything, but this year I decided to really get into it, and I found your podcast, which has helped me learn so much and become a better angler. Thanks for all you do with the podcast. Anyways, right now I have a lot of cheap rods and reels that I acquired over the years, and this year I bought a Pflueger President spinning reel and a nice ugly stick rod that has been great. I use it for everything, but I want to get a versatile do-everything casting rod and reel setup as well, but I only have around $200 total to spend. I did some research and found the Shimano SLX XTA reel for $145 and then the Daiwa Aired X rod for $60. But in one of your episodes, I heard you say that you would prefer to spend more on a rod and less on a reel because all you do is pull in line with your reel, whereas the rod gives you the sensitivity, casting distance, etc. I was hoping to hear your thoughts on what I should get. Sorry for the app sesh, and thanks for all you do, Jace." Well, hey, Jace, thanks for writing in. And that's a really good question. And you're right. I have said that in the past, and I still believe that if you put a gun to my head and you said, what should you spend more on, a rod or a reel? I would spend more on the rod because, again, I think the rod is more important. Like you said, its sensitivity, its casting distance, its power. It really is, I think, a more important tool than your reel. But the other thing to consider here when you're on a budget is if you take care of it, the reel might actually last you longer, where a rod is a little bit more prone to breaking and accidents. And especially if you get a cheap rod, it might not last you 10 plus years. So what you're suggesting and the rod and the reel that you just mentioned there actually makes a lot of sense to me. Because if you buy the $145 SLX XTA reel, that reel is going to last you years and years. That is an awesome reel. That is a worthy investment of making for sure. And then if you spend $60 on the Aired X rod, which by the way is a good rod, like for $60, I don't know if you're going to find a better rod out there right now. Maybe the Shimano Celis, but those would be the two that I would look at in that price range. But one of those two rods is going to do you great for now. I mean, use it, get used to it. And yes, you might eventually outgrow it or you might want to upgrade down the road, but you can use it for now until that happens, until a year or 2 or 3 from now when you're ready to upgrade, because that SLX XTA will still be great at that time. And then you can upgrade the rod when you're ready and you already have that reel that's going to last you years and years. So that would actually maybe be my suggestion. The SLX XTA, I think, is a good investment. And then you just need a rod to get you by until you're ready to upgrade down the road. I think the SLX XTA will last you longer. So I would maybe do that. And yeah, I would look at that Daiwa Aired X rod. I would also look at the Shimano Celis. Those are great rods that you might actually find that you don't want to upgrade super fast. I mean, I have a Shimano Celis that I use and I legitimately very much so like at the moment. So I think that's probably the right path. I think the investment of the SLX XTA is a good investment to make, and just get a rod that's good enough for you right now that you can upgrade down the road. All right, the next question here is from Devin, who says, "Hi, Andrew. Since getting back into fishing from a long hiatus since my youth, your pod has given me the knowledge to make this a truly enjoyable learning experience. I'm a recent listener, so you may have covered this in a past episode that I have not found yet. But anyways, I've been looking into getting into using spooks or other topwaters, but I truly dislike using treble hooks. Many times, the hooks get all over the place and make getting the fish back into the water ASAP take much longer. I want to get my first technique-specific rod for topwater and, for most often, spooks. In my research, everything reads to go with a medium or a medium-heavy moderate action rod for spooks due to treble hooks. Here's my trouble. I plan on changing all of the trebles to inline hooks. And then parentheses, it says, I know this will decrease my hookup ratio, but viva la fish. And then it says, do you think that going with a medium-heavy fast action would actually help improve my hookup ratio when using inline hooks? Open to all ideas. Much appreciated for your time. Wishing you all the best, Devin. Well, hey, Devin, I appreciate the question. And I'm going to say this first. You don't have to listen to it. You probably won't listen to it, but I'm going to tell you anyway because I feel like I have to say it. Leave the treble hooks on your spooks and your poppers. Don't switch them out for single hooks. Leave the treble hooks on. Like, I actually don't know if I agree that the single hooks are actually better for the fish than treble hooks. Trebles don't go in as deep. They're usually lighter wire. They're just kind of sticky. So you get multiple shallower hooks in that fish versus one or two single hooks. It's going to penetrate a little harder and a little deeper in that fish's mouth. I don't know. I just think less bass have probably been killed over the years by treble hooks than they have been by single hooks, would be my guess. And then I would say, to solve your problem of it taking too long to get the treble hooks out of that fish and you want to get that fish in the water faster, which I 100% agree with. And I think that's a great idea. And that's a very noble reason for wanting to switch out your hooks. Just get a cheap pair of pliers and get those hooks out fast. Like, I can get trebles out of any fish's mouth with some needle nose pliers in like 8 seconds or less. So I don't think that is a big enough reason to go from treble hooks to single hooks. But if you don't want to listen to me and you want to go with inline hooks, I personally still wouldn't change much about my setup. So for me, I would much rather have a medium than a medium heavy for topwater. That's just, I think, better for working the bait. I think it's better so that you don't rip those trebles, in my case, out as bad. There's more play in that rod when you do get a fish hooked. And if you're going with a medium heavy, especially a medium heavy fast, you're going to drive those single hooks in even harder, which I would maybe argue is not as good for the fish, which is kind of like one of the original reasons of you wanting to switch those hooks in the first place. So I would just say I would rather use treble hooks, get them a little shallower in that fish, use some pliers, get the hooks out a little faster. And when you use like a medium moderate or a medium moderate fast rod, the rod has so much more of a moderate action that you're not driving those hooks in so hard, and it's not really that bad for the fish. Like, yes, I think if you're throwing giant, gaff treble hooks, like the treble hooks that come on like a plopper or something, and you're throwing those on, a medium heavy rod with braid on it, you're slacklining those fish when they hit it and you're just whipping them on the hook set, then yeah, that can be not a great thing for the mortality of those fish. But if you have a good topwater setup, you've got a medium, moderate or medium moderate fast rod, you've got, mono, you've got some sort of light braid, you're really sweeping your hook set, and you have small enough good sticky treble hooks, I don't think you should have that big of an issue with fish mortality. And get you a good pair of pliers and get those hooks out fast and get those fish back in the water. So that is my advice. I know that's probably not the advice you're looking for, but that's what I would do. All right. And then our last question here for today is from Lehman, who says, hey, Andrew, love the show. What are your top 5 summer pond lures? Okay. Top 5 summer pond lures. I'm going to say a frog is going to make my list because it just has to. There are going to be some ponds that are going to be so scummed over and the opportunity presents itself and it's the best time of year to fish a frog. So I'm going to throw a frog. I'm going to throw a big Texas rigged like ribbon tail worm. So again, we've talked about that on the show like at length, but I'm going to have some sort of like 8 to 9 inch ribbon tail worm on a big Texas rig. I'm going to have a wacky rig, just like a regular Senko or a Yum Dinger or, a Sticko from Bass Pro Shop, something like that. I'm going to have just a standard wacky rig. I'm going to have a buzz bait because especially dawn and dusk, a buzz bait in the summertime is so much fun. And then I'm going to go with a chatterbait. I mean, you have to have some sort of moving bait that you can throw subsurface, and a chatterbait's going to get you through both open water and weedy ponds. You're still going to be fine throwing like a good chatterbait through them. So yeah, that would be my top 5. I would say frog, big Texas rig, ribbon-tail worm, wacky rig, buzzbait, and chatterbait. Those are going to be my top 5 summer pond lures. All right, everybody, that is our episode today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Tackle Talk podcast. I appreciate you all a ton. As always, you can go find us on the web, tackletalkpodcast.com. Over there, you can submit your own mailbag question to be heard on an upcoming episode. You can vote in next week's fishing poll. All of that is over on the Tackle Talk site. You can shoot us an email, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram and Facebook, all that good stuff. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2019. For more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.